Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. Not long ago, if you mentioned the deep state, many would call you a conspiracy theorist. Now we are discussing how strong it is and its loyalties. And most importantly, does it respect the will of the people? Cross-talking the deep state, I'm joined by my guest Matthew Sheffield in Washington. He is a columnist and editor at Salon.com. In Los Angeles, we have William Craddick. He is the editor-in-chief at Disobedient Media. And in London, we cross to Charles Shoebridge. He is a security analyst and a former UK Army and counterterrorism intelligence officer. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Charles, if I can go to you first in London. It kind of surprised me. I think it was back in December, the New York Times had in one of its headlines, Deep State, and I'd never seen that before. And we've all thought of the deep state. It was, the invisible government, the shadow government, and unelected government and things like that. But, it's really come into the fore because of the election cycle here. And I don't want to go into conspiracy theories. We all know that there are powerful figures that are not elected in government. What I want to talk about on this program is, should we be worried about them, because the cascade of forces are slightly different than what we had, let's say, during Vietnam, Watergate, Iran-Contra. And I'm talking about the media here. So go ahead, Charles. Where do we stand here with the deep state?
Yes, you're right. I mean, the term deep state, of course, has become very prominent, certainly in the media, in relation to the Trump episodes and his difficulties that he's been encountering, allegedly, with the so-called deep state. But it goes back very many years. I mean, you alluded to Vietnam and others, and of course, it goes back into Greek days, I think. And indeed, you and I, Peter, we've mentioned it on CrossTalk before, even in relation to or at least we've alluded to the concept of the deep state in relation to the difficulties that Obama and his administration was having in getting its policies actually enacted on the ground, the resistance it was meeting, for example, over Syria and so on. I think if we look at what the deep state is, it's perhaps useful to come up with some kind of definition. There are various ones available. But for me, it really means the existence and the actions of actors, let's say, within a state, not just state institutions such as intelligence and defense agencies and institutions, but also maybe the media, think tanks, the big, powerful corporations that I think over a period of time acquire such power that they move from a position of simply informing and, of course, enacting state policy to actually acquiring such influence that you can be saying that they're actually, to some extent, controlling it or obstructing it. And we've seen that, for example, that the interesting part of this, I think, is that in the main, those actors that are said to be part of the deep state are those that are most immune from any democratic oversight or scrutiny. And of course, that's where the intelligence services come to mind. And one other factor, of course, is that it's another main point of this is that these actors then act not in the state's interest, but they act in their own interest, and they effectively hijack state policy in order to carry out their own long-term or short-term interests, or perhaps the interests that they believe are in the state's interest, irrespective of what the actually democratically elected executive states it wants.
William, in Los Angeles, can you weigh in on that? Because we've seen the deep state. I mean, we can go back to the Eisenhower's military-industrial complex. We all know what's out there. But to what degree is it in control of state apparatus right now, vis-a-vis the president and his administration? Because we've seen this plethora of leaks, and we had a leak also of his tax returns. That's the 8th major one. We can talk about, is he going to push back against the deep state by leaking himself? Okay, go ahead, William, in Los Angeles.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think that when you refer to the deep state, it's really important to properly identify what it is. The deep state is what I kind of refer to as an unholy alliance of government officials, members of the intelligence community, and the military, and they should be considered distinct from other groups such as, the Seventh Floor Group, which has been alluded to in FBI documents, for example, or perhaps the apparatus of the Obama administration has left behind in office. So you have these leaks coming from all over the place. The deep state is something that we've really increasingly become aware of since Trump became president, and it does seem to it does seem to appear that they have gotten their tentacles into a lot of different industries. The media, like you said, think tanks. You can look up yourself. A number of think tanks are connected financially to some of these various agencies. So it's something that we're becoming aware of. But I think that it's something most of the public until recently didn't even acknowledge. So our knowledge of it is fairly limited at this point.
Matthew, can you weigh in on that? Because people that have been looking at government policy, and we can go back to Vietnam. We had the Pentagon Papers. Iran-Contra. We had Robert Perry as a great journalist. The media is playing along with it. This is what makes it different in my mind, is because the media is an extension, the public face of these deep state players. Go ahead, Matthew in Washington.
Well, I think the media is always going to accept leaks that are given, no matter where they're coming from. There was the very famous journalist Robert Novak. He once said that all the best stories that he ever had were stories that were given to him, not ones that he had put in the work for himself to develop. And so that you can rest assured that no matter who is doing the leaking, whether in the case of like the tax returns, perhaps Donald Trump himself, journalists are in the business of providing, unearthing information to the public, and they're going to accept that information regardless of who it comes from. And so that's sort of what's the new dynamic for the Trump administration compared to some of the others is that Donald Trump, in many ways, is kind of recapitulating the war on the bureaucracy that Richard Nixon mounted when he first came into the presidency. And just like Nixon, he didn't really have a game plan for installing his own people at the top of of the bureaucratic apparatus. And so there are many hundreds of positions which Donald Trump could be filling, which he hasn't even nominated people for. And these are people that are not subject to Senate confirmation or review. He literally could put whoever he wants in there. And no one could do anything about it. But he hasn't done that. And so what's happening is that in a lot of ways, because there's no policy coming directly from the White House, the agencies and the employees and whatnot, and the outside actors, they're kind of left to their own devices to do whatever they want. And it's kind of creating some chaos.
Yeah, but I mean, if I can go back to Charles here, I mean, number one, because there are so many vacancies, these people in the media and the deep state are taking advantage of it, number one, okay? Let's go back to my historical references here. When we look at the Vietnam War, the Pentagon Papers, and we look at Iran-Contra, these were leaks because of wrongdoing. And these were leaks after reporters researched it thoroughly before they went public here. This is the difference, Charles, this time, is it's innuendo, it's anonymous, and it's creating a narrative to sabotage this administration. This is what makes it very different in the past, and the media are going along with it. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, you're absolutely right in this respect, as of course in so many others. And we've got, I mean, there's no question that the media have become, if you like, an extension of those within government and without government. We think of think tanks, and also, of course, let's not forget that organisations like think tanks, academics, pressure groups, so-called fact-checking organisations, humanitarian organisations, and even groups arguably such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, that have all become to some degree, if you like, the third-party purveyors of government messages to some degree, for example, coming from the Foreign Office or the State Department in terms of their narrative. And it's almost as if it's creating some distance because, of course, the public, because of those historical references you're talking about, has become aware of not trusting to, on face value, what the government actually says. So, of course, it's outsourced to so-called independent bodies who apparently have more credibility until you start looking deeply at, for example, their funding. But I would make one point in respect of the media accepting leaks. I still think, I agree with that point, but the media has been quite selective in the degree in the way in which it treats leaks. If one thinks about the way that a lot of the leaks, for example, about Trump, for example, let's think of the smear dossier that came from the ex-MI6 officer that contained completely unverified and remains unverified allegations that were of a very damaging nature, or could have been if Trump cared, but still were put in a public domain. those were given given great prominence by the media, as opposed to questioning how that information
but most
came
journalists
about.
overwhelmingly condemn that.
No, for sure. But I mean, if
most journalists condemn
that
release.
With the Podesta emails, for example, the Podesta leaks were given far more prominence, not in terms of their content, but in the alleged way that they came about through Russia. So leaks are dealt with differently according to, I think, the agenda of the media concerned. I think that's clear.
Matthew, you wanted to jump in there. Go ahead. Make your point.
Oh, well, I was going to say that the overwhelming number of American journalists were opposed to releasing that so-called dossier. I mean, even CNN, which had been the first to mention it, explicitly refused to mention the contents of it and condemned the website BuzzFeed for doing it. Now, I would say at the same time, that it is certainly true that a lot of journalists who cover the national news within D.C. Certainly do lean leftward, but the idea that this is some sort of, conspiracy is just not true. I mean, the reality is that if you look at right-wing media organizations, they do almost no reporting. They literally just, almost without exception, just are reacting to reports that other people have made. And so the idea that there is some that this is some grand conspiracy on the part of unelected actors is just simply not true. It's a lot of this is simply incompetence on the part of people who support Trump. If they wanted to have things that were damaging to Chuck Schumer or something like that, then
I have to go to a hard break, gentlemen. We have to go to a hard break here. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on the deep state. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LaBelle. To remind you, we're discussing the deep state. Okay, I'd like to go back to William in Los Angeles. I'd like to kind of react to what Matthew had to say about the media's role in all this. I think it's really kind of an understatement to claim that there is no bonding, as it were, of anonymous sources, leftovers in the Obama administration still in government in the media. I mean, it seems concerted 24/7 over and over and over again. You only have some voices at Fox News that push back, and I'm not going to make any condemnations here. I would just like to see a whole lot more evidence presented before the condemnations come out. That's all. Go ahead, William in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I want to strongly contest the assertion my associate at Salon made. The mainstream media is dragged kicking and screaming to report on leaks that have been released by WikiLeaks, especially during the election cycle. And the assertion that the right-wing media was reacting to things rather than setting the narrative themselves is just utterly ridiculous. It goes beyond the right-wing media. Just we're seeing this general era of new media where media organizations that are up and coming, especially on the internet, are reporting things that the mainstream will not. And the mainstream media is marked by quoting anonymous sources and using faulty evidence to base their claims on. We talked about this dossier that supposedly originated from MI6 was patently on its face fraudulent, and it was peddled by many organizations that in the mainstream media as being legitimate, or at least if they did not say so themselves, they reported it and gave it so much airtime that in the minds of readers it did become legitimate. So I strongly contest that claim. It's utterly ridiculous to assert that the media doesn't form some sort of an echo chamber, and the deep state plays into that through these think tanks and with their specialists and organizations that are busy setting the narrative, which is then parroted by the media to the people.
You know, Charles, one of the things I find really disturbing is that we have this, the deep state is politicized. I mean, we saw this concerted effort of people that, very prominent figures, former CIA directors like that, really coming out with Hillary Clinton. But what bothers me here is I can understand partisanship, no problem. But, you know, this Maddow tax return thing, which I watched, was a complete fiasco. I mean, what an embarrassing moment in television. But the significance of that, I think, is missed on a lot of people, is that you have if the Trump administration did this leak, then it's a bit hollow, all their cries about other leaks here. But what I worry about is that we're going to get into this really deep partisan war inside the deep state, okay? Then they're taking swipes at each other, okay? And maybe that's the new level of warfare. But you know what? It destroys institutions when you do that kind of thing. Leaking is wrong. It's a felony, some of the stuff that is coming out here. And I don't want to see both sides, all sides, getting into this tumble, because it just destroys institutions and it destroys confidence that people have in government and in democracy. Go ahead, Charles, in London.
Yes, again, these are all good points. And of course, regardless of the very many justified criticisms, including from people such as myself, who have, if you like, worked in this industry of the intelligence services, we as functioning societies need intelligence services. We need to be policed, because the fact is that no matter what political capital is made, for example, in exaggerating terrorism threats and so on, terror threats do exist. We need properly run, efficient, competent security services, for example, with good oversight, who are working as one in the task that they should be working at, which is to protect the state and inform the state, but not to, if you like, direct the state. And I think that's what the allegations are in respect of the deep state, aspects of the deep state. It's also, of course, interesting to consider whether, for example, people within the so-called deep state were rooting for Hillary Clinton because they see themselves as partisan servants to her, or whether they would do so thinking that she would be a better servant for them in pursuing and promoting their long-held aims. And when one looks at, for example, the background of Clinton's campaign, again, going back to the Podesta emails, the way that she was financed by so many different interest groups internationally at a time when she was controlling, to a large degree, US foreign policy. One thinks of Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on, Ukraine oligarchs, and so on. Then, of course, one has to wonder whether actually she's serving the interests of the deep state rather than the other way around, and therefore, of course, there was some interest in keeping her on. I'd like to mention just one very quick point that's very interesting to me, is the fact that perhaps this has happened for years and we haven't known about it, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that actually the deep state extends beyond any one state. If you look at, for example, the relationship between the NSA, GCHQ and MI6, for example, in Britain, and the degree to which a lot of this campaign against Trump seems to have come from MI6 or people related to MI6 or to the British security services, and bearing in mind that British government policy, of course, was very much in line with what Clinton's foreign policy would have been. One wonders the degree to which this deep state has almost become like an international institution pursuing its aims, and of course with multinational corporations as well.
You know, Matthew, let's weigh in on that, because, you know, the deep state has been around for a long time. No one denies that. I'm just very worried that it is destroying confidence in institutions here, just as we heard Charles say here. I mean, it could be much more vast than we even know. And, you know, then what's the point of having elections here if we're going to have people, unelected figures, determining policy? And you know what? I mean, the ultimate question that we have to ask in this program is, can the deep state actually have Trump removed from office one way or another? Go ahead, Matthew in Washington.
Yeah. Well, when you think about the policies that generally are backed by the sort of the unelected bureaucracy that sort of is what we're calling the deep state. The policy is, in many cases, has always been created by unelected people, but at the same time, I think there is definitely a concern that they need to be having more internal, disagreements and keeping some of those within rather than allowing information to be coming out. I mean, like such as, for instance, the the controversy regarding Mike Flynn, the
Right.
first director of national intelligence.
National Security.
The Security Council.
Right.
His role there, honestly, was doubted by people across the political spectrum because he has a long record of making very strange and bizarre comments about Islam and about the immense Iranian conspiracies, and so he wasn't well regarded by both the left or the right.
But Matthew, you bring up you bring up a very good point. How you described Flynn, I don't have a problem with. I don't really at all. Okay, what I have a problem with is the process of some people in the deep state getting rid of someone like that, because they're showing that the deep state can go out and demonize and destroy people, and they can do it. They can do it behind closed doors. Well, we should know who did that.
What if it was Steve Bannon who did it?
But the problem is that
Steve
people.
Bannon
But you're
hates
saying
him.
you don't like Flynn, and I guess it's easy for you to accept that he's gone. Maybe fine. I'm not displeased that he's gone. I'm really displeased how he was gotten rid of, because anyone in the state bureaucracy, anyone appointed, can be demonized and have their characters destroyed, and that is absolutely wrong, and it's illegal to do that. William, this is one of the things I'm getting at. What is different between the past and how the deep state operated and what they're doing right now? This is targeting officials, using the media and destroying them because you don't like them.
But
that's
this
not
still
fair.
could have been Steve Bannon.
Okay, we need to find out. But just don't turn the page. Just turn the page and say you're happy he's gone, because that doesn't solve the problem. Let me go to William in Los Angeles. Go ahead, William.
We can sit here and spew conspiracy theories about Steve Bannon all day. What's really causing these problems is that, especially in the past decade, this deep state apparatus has developed increasingly close ties to private special interests. In the financial and business worlds, particularly. That's the international element of what you're referring to as the deep state, and these private special interests are pushing the deep state further and further to perform favors for them, and they're exposing themselves as they have with the Flynn wiretap. Now this is a topic of conversation because the deep state overextended themselves and became something that the public could perceive, and I think that you've been starting to see them try to mitigate that by setting up the CIA to become the whipping boy for a lot of the various policies that are now drawing public ire. It's curious that WikiLeaks was dumped a whole bunch of documents, all pertaining to operations conducted by the CIA, for example.
Okay, well, that's a very interesting angle, and we don't have any real answers there. I mean, WikiLeaks for the last 10 years, everything it's put out, it's been legit, okay? I mean, how they get it is a different question, but at least the material is legit, most people agree. Charles, let me go to you in London, your last 40 seconds there. Where is this going to go? Do they have the power to have Donald Trump replaced, or is it we're at the end game of that? Go ahead, 30 seconds, go ahead.
Well, of course, in the nightmare scenario, one would look at the last president, arguably, to challenge the deep state, was John F. Kennedy. What happened there? And nobody's saying that is going to happen to Trump, but of course it's a possibility. I suspect people within the deep state, so-called deep state, would very much like to get rid of Donald Trump. He needs to be aware of that. He needs to push back a bit more, and he needs eventually to set out root and branch reform of this deep state to regain the confidence of the institutions from the American people and indeed the world generally.
Or said differently, drain the swamp. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Los Angeles, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. I love you.